We are always conditioned to believe that danger lives in the bad parts of town, in dark alleys, and among criminals, but the most terrifying monsters are the ones that hide behind freshly cut lawns, manicured hydrangeas, and polite waves over a white picket fence. My name is Alice, and 6 months ago, my husband and I moved into Elm Street seeking peace and stability. I thought we were safe. I thought the worst we would face was an annoying lawnmower early on Sunday mornings. I didn't know that every night, when the rest of the street was sleeping, a silent, sickening ritual was beginning on the other side of our bedroom wall. Our neighbors, the Millers, were perfect on paper, an older couple, retired, always smiling, but the facade began to crack immediately. It started with the smells, a heavy, cloying scent of sulfur and burnt chemicals began drifting through our vents every night. At exactly 3 a.m., I mentioned it to David, my husband, but he laughed it off, blaming it on their eccentric gardening or old plumbing. Then I noticed the birds. They would land in our yard, but they would never land in the Millers. If they did, they would simply drop dead on the grass. I started keeping a journal, tracking the smells, the sounds of low, rhythmic chanting, and the strange, unseasonal dead patches on their property line. I wasn't being paranoid. I was gathering evidence that something unholy had taken root in our suburban paradise. By the second month, the subtle weirdness consolidated into undeniable silent rites. I couldn't sleep. The scratching sound of something sharp being dragged across concrete became a constant nightly rhythm. I started observing their backyard from our second-story window. Shielded by darkness, the Millers didn't just garden. They were constructing a grid. They would walk in synchronized geometric patterns, burying small, dark objects at specific intersection points. One night, I saw a flash of candlelight and the outline of a low, jagged stone altar. The chanting wasn't melodic. It was a series of guttural, clicking sounds that made my teeth ache. I knew I had to see it closer. Paranoia became my quarantine. I stopped answering the phone, avoided my friends, and built an invisible wall around myself, terrified that my obsession would make me a target. I managed to sneak onto their property line and found a geometric symbol scratched into the trunk of an ancient oak tree. The bark around the sigil was dead and black. I found tiny, bleached bones scattered near the roots. My neighbors weren't harmless, eccentric seniors. They were executing a slow, systematic ritual, and I was the only one who could see the pattern. By the third month, the entity they were channeling decided to make its presence known. Our domestic tranquility disintegrated. David became sluggish, pale, and prone to sudden bursts of confusion. He was constantly oversleeping, claiming he had a permanent migraine, and his memory began to fail. He would sit on the sofa in the dark, staring blankly at the wall, struggling to breathe. The low chanting from next door seemed to be vibrating through the floorboards, poisoning the very air in our home. I knew they were targeting him to protect us. I initiated a grim protocol of containment. I spent my days reinforcing the internal locks, taping down the edges of the windows with heavy duct tape, and blocking all the ventilation grates to stop the sulfurous air and the demonic whispers from entering. I sealed us in completely. I sat in the dark living room, clutching a kitchen knife, watching David slowly fade away under the weight of the neighbor's curse. I was exhausted, dizzy, and my chest felt incredibly heavy. The magic was draining both of us. The climax of the ritual happened on a freezing Tuesday night. It was 3 a.m. I was lying on the floor next to David, who was completely unconscious and barely breathing. My vision was blurring, and the chanting from next door was louder than ever, a deafening, rhythmic roaring in my ears. Suddenly, the silence of the street was shattered by screaming sirens and violently flashing red and blue lights, reflecting through our taped-up windows. The heavy thud of boots pounded onto our porch, followed by the terrifying sound of glass shattering, and our front door being smashed open. Heavy silhouettes swarmed our living room. I tried to lift the knife to defend us from the cult, but my arms were too weak. Strong hands grabbed me, pulling me away from my husband. I heard someone yelling, "We have 2 victims. Get the oxygen masks. Now, clear the house." As they carried me out onto the cold lawn, I looked over at the Miller's house. It was completely dark, quiet, ordinary. My eyes rolled back, and I faded into absolute blackness. The true psychological horror of my story didn't reveal itself until I woke up in a brightly lit hospital room. A doctor was standing over my bed, holding a chart. David was alive, recovering in the ICU. The puzzle was finally put together, and it broke me entirely. There was no coven, there was no black magic. The Millers were just an ordinary retired couple who liked to do standard gardening in the cool evening air. The sulfur and burnt chemicals I smelled, the dead birds in the yard, David's lethargy and memory loss, my dizzy spells, the heavy chest, the auditory hallucinations of rhythmic chanting. It was severe, prolonged carbon monoxide poisoning. Our old basement furnace had a cracked heat exchanger. It was slowly leaking invisible, odorless toxic gas into our home every night. When the heating kicked on, when I barricaded the windows and sealed the vents to protect us from the magic, I actually trapped the carbon monoxide inside, turning our home into a literal gas chamber. My paranoid brain, starved of oxygen, had fabricated the occult symbols, the bones, and the cult to make sense of the physical symptoms. If a passing patrol car hadn't noticed the dense buildup of exhaust fumes venting from our broken basement window, we would have died that night. The only monsters in the suburbs are the invisible ones we build in our own minds.